Great. Thank you, everybody, for sharing. I'm glad to have you all here, and I hope that everyone gets something out of our lesson tonight. Before we dive into today's session, I just wanted to give you a heads up about a couple of other free options for LSAT prep if you're looking for more opportunities like this one. We allow people to try out our classes. You can take the first session of any of our 10-session LSAT classes for free. They are offered in person in most major cities and then online as well. It's a 3-hour class that gives you a great in-depth dive into a particular type of logic game and an introduction to logical reasoning. It also gives you a really good feel for what our classes are like if you're thinking about whether taking a full class is something that might be beneficial to you. Another great resource that's free is a sample of our LSAT Interact tool. It's a really awesome video series that provides you with opportunities to input your own answers. And then once you input the answer, it gives you different feedback depending on which answer you put in. So it might say like, oh, you got that question right. Do you want to review it or do you want to just move on? Or, oh, sorry, you missed that question. Let's go over this concept. And the Interact videos are taught by our teachers. So you'll see some of our faces in those videos. You can find those resources on our website. Tonight's lesson is going to focus on logic games. We're going to do a full logic game together. And the particular type of logic game that we're going to do is what we at Manhattan Prep call open grouping. It's possible you'll have seen it referred to by other names in different test prep materials I've seen. In addition to working on this particular game type, which many folks find challenging, we are also going to talk about a couple of tools that are really useful for all logic games, and those include what we call the big pause, and a strategy that's really, really helpful across the board for making logic games inferences, and that is the strategy of who's left. So before we dive in, let me know in the chat window, have you heard of open grouping games before, or even just grouping games? Does that language sound familiar to you, or is this something new? Would you like me to explain it? Okay, yeah, I see a couple of folks asking for a bit more explanation. Absolutely. So you'll get the best explanation when you actually see the game for yourself. But let's talk about it. So in general, on the LSAT, logic games are going to come in one of two sort of forms. There are games that ask you to put things in order, and there are games that ask you to put things in groups. And here at Manhattan Prep, we call those ordering games and grouping games. And those are the very, very vast majority of tasks that you'll be given on logic games. We also have some logic games that ask you to do both of those things, and we call those hybrid games. Within games that ask you to put things into groups, we have two different types. One of those types we call basic grouping, and one of those types we call open grouping. And I'll give you a quick example of each. So basic grouping might be a situation where you say, there are 3 recreational soccer teams in our community. There's Team S, there's Team T, and there's Team U. And we have, let's just say 9 children, letters K, L, M, and so on. And so we're going to put those 9 children onto these 3 teams. And each team is going to have exactly 3 children on the team. You'll get rules in a grouping game that will tell you things like K cannot be on a team with L. Maybe they're mortal enemies, or they had a big fight in class, they can't go together. Or M must be on a team with S. Maybe they are siblings. And you will know the exact number of spaces that are available on each of those teams or each of those groups. And you'll know the number of elements you're trying to fit into those groups. So there will be a neat numerical match between the elements and the groups. That is basic ordering. Basic grouping. Open grouping is similar, but with a little bit of a twist. So now we've got the same 3 soccer teams, S, T, and U, but maybe each soccer team is just going to take as many children as meet the criteria. So we don't know exactly how many kids can go on each soccer team. So we could say maybe each soccer team can take potentially all of the kids. So the game might say there's 5 kids signing up for soccer teams, A, B, C, D, and E. And any of those kids can go on any of these teams. It might say something like each team needs to have at least 1 kid on it, but it's not going to tell you each team has exactly 3 or each team has exactly 6. So the major difference between basic grouping and open grouping is that in open grouping, part of your job is figuring out how many in each group. You do not have to do that in basic grouping because you are told how many go in each group. The other part of both games is to figure out who goes in each group. Open grouping just has the added element of how many. What we're going to see tonight is that when you set up an open grouping board, you want to make inferences about who can go in each group, but you also want to make inferences about how many can go in each group. And we'll learn some notation for doing that and some ways of thinking about that. All right, I'm going to pause for a second and just let me know what questions you have. We'll flesh out a lot of the details of this when we do an actual game together, but so far, if you have any questions, throw them in the chat window. Okay, not seeing any right now, so let me clear this off. In just a moment, I'm going to give you the setup for an open grouping game. Now, if this is your first time doing an open grouping game, if, when I explained that, you were like, oh, actually, I've never really thought about that before, or, haven't learned this type of logic game before, then this might feel like a challenge, and that makes sense. And your goal for this should be to familiarize yourself with the game, do the best that you can, and then use this as a learning opportunity for figuring out how to set up one of these games. And I'll coach you through it, but it's really important before I start coaching you through it that you just kind of get your hands on this game a little bit so that when we start talking about it together, you have a starting point and it makes sense to you. So I'm going to give you the setup of the game. I'm not going to give you any of the questions just yet. And I'm going to give you about 3.5 minutes to create whatever diagram feels right to you. When you are done creating your diagram, I am going to talk you through how I would make the diagram and solicit your questions, and then we'll do some of the actual questions for this game. Hopefully by the end of this session, if this is your first time doing an open grouping game, you'll have a better sense of what makes something an open grouping game and how to set it up. If you've done this type of thing before, hopefully you'll pick up some finer points of open grouping along the way. All right, so here is the game. Again, no questions just yet. I'm going to hop off the camera while you work, but I'm still here and I'll be back in about 3.5 minutes to check in with you. All right, that is 3.5 minutes. How did it go? Tell me in the chat. How did you feel about your diagram? Were you able to come up with a clear diagram? Were you able to make lots of inferences? Was this challenging? Tell me how it went. Good, I'm glad it went well, Salem. How'd it go for everybody else? Great, nice, Veronica. Glad you're making some inferences based on how many can attend each day. So I'm going to talk you through this diagram. I'm going to ask you a couple questions along the way. The first is, I told you ahead of time that this would be an open grouping game, but the first step of any logic game is game recognition. You want to be able to walk away from our session today able to identify an open grouping game on your own without being told that that's what it is. So one thing that's interesting about this game is I see Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. And I'm always starting off a game trying to fit it within that dichotomy that I mentioned earlier. Is this an ordering game or a grouping game? So I see days of the week. Why is this a grouping game and not an ordering game? Tell me in the chat if you have an idea. Why would I classify this as grouping, not ordering, when it's got Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday? I'll give you a hint. It has to do with the rules. Yeah, Veronica said no fixed order sequence. This could have been turned into an ordering game, certainly, but it's all about what are the rules directing you to think about. If this were an ordering game, it would have rules like Franco must be the day before Garcia, or Jackson must be, 2 days after Hong. There is nothing in here that asks us to concern ourselves with the order of these witnesses in relation to each other. Instead, we're being asked to think about who can go together in a group, who cannot go together in a group, and which days are they on. So once I know that it's grouping, I don't see any ordering style rules, then I just have to figure out, is it basic grouping or open grouping? Why do we classify this one as open and not basic? Okay. Veronica says, great question. I need the answer. So remember on the last slide when I was showing you the difference between basic grouping and open grouping, and I said basic grouping, you're just trying to figure out one thing. Who goes in which group? Open grouping, you're trying to figure out two things. Who goes in which group and how many go in each group. So if I look at the information here, in the initial setup, I haven't been told how many people go on each day. If this were a basic grouping, it would say something like 2 people will testify on Monday, 2 people will testify on Tuesday, and 1 person will testify on Wednesday. Instead, we get nothing at all. So when I'm envisioning this game, at the very outset, before I'm given any rules, I can imagine a possibility in which all 5 people testify on the same day. That's what makes this open grouping, is that part of my job is to figure out, well, do all 5 people testify on the same day, or do we have different numbers on different days? And if so, how many? So I'm going to make a diagram to start with that has 5 spaces on each day, and then I'm going to work from there. I'm going to kind of work up when I'm told that there have to be people on a certain day, and I'm going to work down when I'm told that there can't be people on a certain day. So I'm going to label the days at the bottom. Typically, if you weren't sure what to put at the bottom, typically if you're given days of the week or some sort of ordering, that's going to go at the bottom, even if it's a grouping game. And I'm going to work through each of these rules. And I'm thinking about each of these rules from the point of view of those two questions that I gave you. So those two questions being who goes in which group and who doesn't, and then how many in each group. And I want to take sort of the surface level information that I've been given, but then also see if I can push any deeper with that by thinking through these two questions a little more. So if I take the first rule, F does not testify on the same day as G, we call that an anti-chunk. So a chunk is when two letters must go together, like F goes with G. An anti-chunk is when two letters can't go together. I usually draw that just like I have shown you here. Sometimes right next to it, I also draw the two letters side by side with a little circle around them to show me that these two letters on the diagram are going to appear separately in separate columns. Not necessarily in this order, not necessarily right next to each other. That's just a visual. The circle to me means they can kind of move around. But so this tells me about who goes in which group. These two can't go together. They must go separate. There's nothing on this in this rule initially that says anything about how many, but I still want to think about it. If F and G can't go together, how does that affect the highest possible number that could be in each group? So I kind of always just start at the top and work down. If F and G can't go together, can there be 5 in a group? No, because F and G are 2 of the 5, and they can't be in the same group. So once I figured that out, I'm going to go ahead and cross off the top for all 3 groups. No group can have 5 because F and G cannot go together. That's the type of inference that you're going to make a lot of on open grouping. You want to think about, okay, what's the most I can have? What's the least I can have based on this rule? The next one we have is I is going to testify on Wednesday. So I'm going to put I here, and then I'm going to think again. How does this affect how many are going to go in each group? Well, now each group can either have F or G, and then M and T, Monday and Tuesday, cannot have I. So that's one more letter that Monday and Tuesday cannot have. So I'm going to cross off one more row. Now, at the maximum, Monday or Tuesday could have F or G, H, and J for a total of 3 letters. Now we're told exactly 2 witnesses testify on Tuesday. So we get a solid number. I use a box to indicate when there's going to have to be someone in a certain slot. So I don't know who are going to be the 2 witnesses testifying on Tuesday, but I know there will be 2. So I draw 2 boxes and cross off the 3rd slot because it says exactly 2. Then I'm told H does not testify on Monday. I have a kind of standard notation for that that's the same as the one I would use for an ordering game. That looks like this. I'm just going to cross off H. H is not testifying on Monday, so H is going to go either on Tuesday or Wednesday. That doesn't really change anything about the numbers for Tuesday or Wednesday, so I'm going to leave them the same way that they are for now. But if I think about Monday, now Monday can't have H, it can't have I, and it can only have one of F or G. So I can cross off one more space for Monday, it can't have H. And then we get at least 1 witness testifies on Monday. So I'm going to draw a box here. Monday has to have 1, and I'm going to leave the second space open. Monday could have 2. Now I'm going to run through my rules one more time to see if I can make any more inferences. So F is not with G, we've got that taken care of. I is on Wednesday, 2 on Tuesday. H cannot be on Monday, at least 1 on Monday. Looks pretty good. A lot of the times, what will happen with open grouping games is the second time you run through rules, these inferences will kind of build on each other, and you'll get to have even more crossouts. Okay, so that's kind of the main way of thinking through an open grouping game. Let me pause for a second and let me know what you think. Do you have any questions or comments about this board? not seeing anything, but if you're typing one in, please keep typing and I'll address it when it comes up. Before we move to the first question, I mentioned in the agenda that we were going to talk about something called the big pause. So we're going to talk about that now. The big pause is really just 5, 10, maybe 15 seconds that happen after you've set up a diagram like this. You've completed all your inferences, or you think you have, but before you do the first question. The purpose of the big pause is to give you an opportunity to digest what you worked on and to anticipate what's going to be important in the game before you move into the questions. For this particular game, during the big pause, I only have 5 letters, and one of them has already been used. So I have 4 letters up for grabs and not that many spaces. So one thing that can be really useful in during the big pause is to take a moment to imagine hypothetical scenarios. So just kind of play around with it in your head. And when you're imagining those hypothetical scenarios, you'll often want to start with the most restrictive rule. So the most restrictive rule in this game is this F and G anti-chunk because it affects 2 letters directly. So when I'm thinking about hypothetical scenarios, what I'm basically doing is saying, okay, this is my most restrictive rule. How can I put these letters in it on the board? What are some different places it could go? And if it went in those places, where would the other letters possibly go? So take a moment just to think about that, maybe about 10 seconds. Okay. The big pause is a really important step. It's a difficult one to force yourself to implement because on the logic game section, as you all know, you're feeling very time pressured as you work through. But it's really important because it gives you an opportunity to be a bit more strategic as you move through the questions. If you are deciding what's going to be important in the game, if you already have a couple of hypotheticals, if you've already kind of done some practice work with the game before you move into the questions, then you're going to be much more nimble versus if you just throw that last box on there and move straight into the questions without thinking about it at all, and you haven't paused to really understand the diagram that you've created. All right, so speaking of questions, I'm going to go ahead and give you a few questions. Since you've got a full setup, I'm going to let you sort of try each question without any introduction from me, and then I will poll you to get a sense of how we did on the question. And then I'll go through the question. We'll talk about what type of question it is, what's a good strategy for the question in general across all logic games, and how do we answer this question in particular. I'm going to give you a minute. And then you'll see a poll pop up on your screen. All right, poll is up. Please put in your answer. If you haven't gotten a chance to finish, put in your best guess. I only see 3, and I'm waiting on 4 more. Guessing is totally fine. I promise I will not call you out on your guess. I just want to know where we're at. Okay, I'm going to close the poll. Thank you to those of you who voted. So this is what we call an orientation question. There's typically going to be one of these at the outset of each game. So it's right after you set up the diagram. It'll be the first question. You'll know it's an orientation question because it's right after you set up the diagram, but also because it asks you for a complete acceptable scenario of the game. There's a couple of ways that somebody could go about doing a question like this. One way that you could do a question like this is to look at answer choice A and say, okay, so Franco is on Monday. Let me check if that breaks on any rules. No, that seems okay. Okay, H and I are on Tuesday. Does that break any rules? Oh yeah, it does break a rule. It breaks the rule that I testifies on Wednesday, and then cross it off. That way will probably get you to the answer eventually, but it's very time consuming. There's a more efficient way to approach orientation questions, and the approach that I like to use is called the rule by rule approach. Feels a little counterintuitive at first, but it works. The idea behind the rule by rule approach is that I do not start with the answer choices. Instead, I start with the rules. And my diagram, I don't even look at for this question. I promise there's a reason we made the diagram. We'll use it for all the other questions. But for this particular question, I find it most effective to go through the rules. And I'll talk to you a little bit after I go through the rules about why I think that's the most effective approach. So when I go rule by rule, I basically just pick a rule. I usually just start with the first one. And I run through the answers kind of with tunnel vision, looking for just that rule. So F is not with G. I'm just looking for F and G. And anytime that I see that they are together, I'm going to cross it off. So F and G are separate, 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 F and G are separate. Okay, doesn't look like any of them broke that rule. Then I'm looking for I on Wednesday. Anytime I is not on Wednesday, I'll cross it off. First one, I is not on Wednesday, I'm going to cross it off. Cool. Now, usually each rule is just going to eliminate one answer choice. So I might just stop there and move on to the next rule, come back and look for more if I need to. So next rule is exactly 2 witnesses testify on Tuesday. Let me check. B is good, C is good, D is good, E has just 1. I'm going to cross that off. H is not on Monday. Let me check all the answers. Oh, H is on Monday for B. And then at least 1 witness testifies on Monday. So basically no zeros on Monday. C and D are both good. I'm down to 2, so I'm going to just cycle back through the rules one more time to see if I missed anything. F and G are not together. That's fine. I testifies on Wednesday. Oh, looks like C doesn't follow that rule. And the answer is D. I do not even check D. I don't go back and verify that it follows all the rules. If I've used this process, I definitely should have the right answer at this point. Thanks, Veronica. Yay if you got that one correct. And yay if you didn't and you learned something from it. So I mentioned that I would tell you why I do it this way rather than looking at my diagram. First, it's just very methodical. Right? The rules are all there, they're in an order. So it's easy for me to just work from top to bottom. Whereas if I look at my diagram, I'm kind of jumping around arbitrarily and I may accidentally miss a rule. Secondly, this is a good sort of checkpoint to make sure that I haven't made any mistakes in the way I interpreted the rules or made my diagram. So if I'm doing this correctly, I'm going to run my eyes through over each rule and think about it one more time. as is written here in the text. And that gives me one more opportunity if I wrote a rule down wrong incorrectly, or if I misunderstood it, to catch that because I'm rereading the rules. That's really important because what happens is a lot of the times as we work through a game, we let go of the written rules and we just completely trust our diagram, and that's all we're looking at. We're no longer looking at the written rules, which is totally fine as long as your diagram accurately reflects all the rules. But if you made one tiny little mistake, if you put I on Tuesday instead of Wednesday, it's going to mess up the entire game for you. So as far as I'm concerned, any opportunity to kind of double check my work while also accomplishing some other purpose is going to be an effective technique for me, especially right at the outset of the game. So if you are practicing orientation questions this way, you should be able to easily get them done in under a minute. These really should be accomplishable in 30 seconds or less, and you should be able to get all of them right. This is a really straightforward technique that is easy to learn and easy to use. So if you're looking for a quick way to earn some more points on the LSAT, I encourage you to use this one. Let me know if you have any questions about orientation questions. Okay. So for the next question, you're going to need the diagram that you created. And if you didn't put your diagram down, just do your best with this question, and then I'll recreate a diagram with you when it's time for us to review it. I'll give you 1 minute. All right, go ahead and pull in your answer or your best guess at this point. Okay. Seems like this question is a bit more challenging. I'm only seeing 3 answers pulled in, which means that a lot of you are probably still working, which brings up a couple of important points. The first one is that on logic games, it's really important to know when to let go of a question. Pretty much everybody is going to have to skip a question or two on logic games or let go of a question that they're in the middle of, not because they can't solve that question, but because it's going to be tough to solve that question in a limited amount of time. So generally speaking, when you hit the 1 minute mark, you want to kind of be thinking to yourself, am I about to get this right? Or if not, this is probably time for me to fail. So if at 1 minute you're working through this and you're like, yes, this is making sense, I've got a good strategy, I just need to keep working through this and I'll get there, great, keep working on it. If at the 1 minute mark you're like, man, I'm totally lost, I haven't eliminated any answer choices, I don't really understand this question, I don't have a good path forward, that's a good opportunity for you to fail. Another point of strategy on this question has to do with the question type. This is an unconditional question. Now, there are 3 major types of questions on the LSAT. The orientation question, which we just saw, the unconditional question, which we're seeing now, and the conditional question, which we will likely see in a couple of minutes. An unconditional question is a question that asks you just something in general about the diagram without giving you any new information. So it's a very uninformative question. It will just say like, which of the following could be true? Or which of the following must be false? Or cannot be true? But it doesn't tell you anything new. You have to make that decision based only off of the information from the rules in your original diagram and inferences. So here I'm asked to figure out which of the following cannot be true, and I have to work only from my diagram. That's tough, and a lot of people find these questions really difficult, and they are a big time suck. There's one thing that I often do with these questions that makes them go a little bit more smoothly, and that is I save them for last. The reason that I do that is there are a bunch of questions you'll get on any given game called conditionals, and I love those. They'll say something like, if J is on Tuesday, or if F is on Monday. They'll give you a starting point. They'll allow you to create a scenario. And as you work through these questions, you'll create a bunch of boards that have possible scenarios for the game on them. So if you save these unconditionals for last, when you're asked which of the following cannot be true, you can go back to all those boards that you made while you were solving other questions and use them to eliminate some answers. Like, oh, I did have a game where Franco was the only one on Monday, so I can cross that one off. And that's a great way to save time, using your previous work and sort of reshuffling the questions in a way that advantages you. But in this case, we haven't done that. We're just doing the question in the order it's been presented. So we need to have a strategy. So I'm going to go through this, and basically I have to go one answer choice at a time. Now I have two options. Let's say maybe three. So I'm going to look at an answer choice, and I'm going to be kind of mentally testing that. I'm looking for the one that cannot be true, so I'm trying to prove the opposite. I'm trying to prove it can be true so that I can eliminate it. Now, when I try to prove it can be true, I can do that a couple of ways. I can try to do it in my head. I can try to do it on paper, or I can just say kind of something in between where I'm like, I don't really see why not, and I will defer. I'm hoping that the correct answer is going to jump out at me, that I've already made this inference, so I don't want to spend a ton of time on every answer choice. On my first pass through the answer choices, I'm going to do this first one or this third one, not the second one yet. The reason that I'm going to do that is if I'm able to find the correct answer by doing it this way, I'll save a lot of time. At the very least, hopefully I'll be able to eliminate a couple of answers or kind of narrow it down to what I think is going to be correct. So Veronica asked what the correct answer is. I'm not going to tell you yet, but I'm going to show you. I will think out loud how I would think about this. So the first one, let me also draw out my letter bank here. That's an important part of thinking this through. I usually do rewrite it for every question. Franco is the only witness scheduled to testify on Monday. So I'm trying to prove the opposite. I want to prove that it's okay for Franco to be the only one on Monday. So if I were to put Franco on Monday, that just means G would have to go somewhere else, which it totally could. And then that would leave H and J. I'd be able to fill these two boxes. I don't see why not. So I'm going to kind of do like a half mark. I don't think this is the right answer. Okay. F is scheduled to testify on the same day as I. So I could put F here. I would have 3 letters left. I would have G, H, and J. I could put H here. J, G. Seems okay. G and H are both scheduled to testify on Tuesday. So if I put G and H here, that would be okay. F could be separate. J could be somewhere else. That seems fine. G is the only witness scheduled to testify on Monday, and H is one of the 2 witnesses scheduled to testify on Wednesday. That sounds kind of complicated. I'm going to defer. I don't think I could work that through in my head. J is scheduled to testify on Tuesday, and 2 are scheduled to testify on Monday. Sounds complicated too. Okay, so I think it's going to be one of these 2. I'm thinking about, I'll just go ahead and try them both out. So this is where I move into the on paper portion. But notice I'm not doing that for all answers. I'm doing it for the two I think are most likely to be correct. So I'm going to try D first. If G is the only witness on Monday, then H is one of two witnesses scheduled on Wednesday. So I noticed that we're getting then a lot of witnesses. I'm wondering if we're going to run into a numbers problem. So H is here, I is here, G. This is where I come into that question that I told you I'm always asking myself of who's left. So who's left is J and F. So I guess they could both go here. I don't think that would break any rules. F and J are separate. H is not on Monday. I think we're good. So it looks like D is fine, at which point I have another strategic decision to make. I could go ahead and pick E because it's the only answer left. And at this point, like, hopefully I've done the rest of my work correctly, but if I haven't, I don't really have time to start over. So I may as well just go ahead and pick it. Or I can be a little stubborn about it and I can try to prove it to myself. So let's check it out so that we see what it looks like when something cannot be true. So Jackson is scheduled to testify on Tuesday. Two witnesses are scheduled to testify on Monday. So I'm going to add a box here. And I'm going to ask myself that who's left question. So if we've taken J, we've taken I, then what we have left are F, G, and H. But H can't go on Monday. That leaves F and G, but they can't go together. Okay, that makes sense. So there's no way to make E work. E is indeed my correct answer. Good job, Veronica, and everyone else who got it correct. All right, let me pause and see if you have any questions about this. Okay, so big takeaways from this are outside of this game, this is an unconditional question. You want to know the strategies to use. You want to know to save them for last. You want to keep in mind this question of who's left to constantly be asking yourself as you're working through inferences on any logic game question. And then in the domain of strategy, you want to know when to let go of a question, which is going to be after about a minute. Okay, we have a question. Could you infer that Wednesday will never have more than two witnesses? Do you mean just for this question or in general? Oh, I see what you're saying there. That makes sense, yeah. You should be able to infer that. That's a great catch. So where they're getting this from is we've got 3 boxes here. So 3 of the elements have to go on Monday or Tuesday, and there are only 5. So there's only 2 left, so we can cross off 2 spaces here. And definitely infer that Wednesday could have at most 2. Nice work. Okay, let's take a look now at a conditional question, our last question type. I'll give you a minute. All right, poll is coming your way. Throw an answer at me if you've got one. Nice. I'm seeing a lot of excellent work here. Awesome. So this is an example of what we call a conditional question, the last of our 3 question types. We call it a conditional question because it starts with if, and it gives us a new piece of information, which we think of as a condition. For a conditional question, there's a protocol that I always follow, which is to do a quick sketch of a new diagram. And you can see an example of that over here to the side. Notice that I haven't drawn all the lines and slashes. I try to make this as bare bones as possible without losing any information. So I do keep kind of the essential rules written off to the side, but I do this quickly. It's not super tidy or anything. It's just neat enough for me to read. And I make a new diagram because I don't want to write on my original diagram. If I write on my original diagram, then I'm going to have trouble with the rest of the questions because it's going to be hard for me to remember what was true just for this question and what was true for the whole game. So even though it takes a little time, it's really important to create a new diagram. On my new diagram, I add the new information and then I follow the inference chain, which basically just involves a lot of me asking who's left and where can it go. Every time I put a letter on the diagram, I think, okay, who's left? So F or J and I have been used, so I have F, G, and H left. Where can it go? So I think also, what do I know about these letters? Well, what I know about H is that it can't go in M. So looks like it is gonna have to go in Tuesday, thanks to the excellent inference that Wednesday can only have 2. And what I know about F and G is that they can't go together. So it looks like one is gonna go on Monday and one is gonna go on Tuesday. And so that leads me to our correct answer, which is C. Exactly one witness is scheduled to testify on Monday. So it looks like a lot of you did that correctly and well. Most of the work on a conditional question should take place over here on the diagram. These are much more diagram upfront heavy, and then the answer should fall into place once you've done your work over here, compared to the last question that we did where we were kind of working through answer choices one at a time. All right, let me know if you have any questions. We're going to move on and try another one. Give this a shot. All right, that's a minute. New poll is coming your way. Veronica, you took about a minute. All right, looks like a lot of us are in agreement about the answer on this one. Nice work, everybody. So we've got another conditional question. We're going to follow that same protocol of a quick sketch of a diagram. We put our information down, and then we keep asking ourselves, who's left and what do I know about them? So Jackson is the only one scheduled to testify on Monday. We also already have I and Wednesday. So I'm going to cross off the top slot for Monday, and I'm going to cross off J and I. Who's left? The same letters from the last problem, F, G, and H. What do I know about them? I know H can't go on Monday, so where can it go? Well, Tuesday or Wednesday. And I know F and G can't go together. That's helpful. So F or G is going to go on Tuesday, and F or G will go on Wednesday to keep them split apart. Once more, I ask who's left, and the only thing that's left is H. And now I can see that there's only one place that H can go. It has to fill the second spot on Tuesday. Putting something definitive in place gives me a little heads up for where the answer might lie. The only thing that I added to this diagram that I know for sure is that H is on Tuesday. So rather than read through these one at a time, I've kind of got like I'm looking for something with H, I'm looking for something with Tuesday. Save myself a little bit of time on the answer choices there. All right, so correct answer is B. Nice work. We've got, I believe, one more question for this game. Let's give this last one a try. All right, poll is coming your way. Okay, I see a few answers rolling in. It looks like this one is a bit tougher. Answers are coming in a little slower. And the reason for that is that this is a little bit more abstract. We're not told what day they are testifying on. We just know that it's the same day. So when I have a rule like that where I can't put it directly on the diagram right away, I often start by just kind of sketching out the new rule off to the side. So now F is going to be on the same day as H. Now we have a chunk, keeping in mind that G is still an anti-chunk, so G has to be separate. When I look at my diagram, I now want to think, where can my new chunk go? If F and H have to go together, they can't go on Monday because H can't go on Monday. They also can't go on Wednesday because there are only 2 spaces available on Wednesday and one of them is taken. It looks like they're going to have to go on Tuesday. Now I could keep rolling with this, but I'm hopeful that I just put something on the board. Maybe that's going to be the correct answer. I won't do any more work than I have to. So I'll take the lazy way out and I'm going to check the answers now. Hey, look at that. H is scheduled to testify on Tuesday is one of the answers. So it must be the correct one. I picked D and I am done. Okay, that is the last question for this game. If you would like to try this game again, it's from Practice Test 68, so it'd be a great one for you to check out. If you are interested in looking at one of our courses, trying a first session for free, you can find our course schedule on our website, and the link is right here. If you have any questions, even if they're not about open grouping, just about the LSAT in general, I will stick around for a couple of minutes and take them. Just throw them in the chat window. If not, this is where we're going to wrap up. Thank you so much for coming. Good luck with your LSAT studying, and have a great evening. Hey, Veronica, that's a good question. We don't have a course just for logical reasoning. Our course covers all of the areas. It does emphasize logical reasoning, but you would still be sitting through reading comp and logic games. One option would be to try the Interact course, where you could kind of select just to do the logical reasoning Interact lessons and not do logic games and reading comprehension. Other questions? Alexis, the exact percent escapes me, but the number that's coming to mind is 11%. It's somewhere around there. Veronica, I would say that this is a moderate difficulty level. It is one where if you're able to do the setup, as you saw, the questions come pretty easily, but the setup itself is not one of the easier setups. Okay. I'm going to wrap us up here, and I hope you all have a great evening.